Good afternoon. I would like to talk to you about an initiative that my colleague from the Internet Society is coordinating at a global level, and he asked me to talk to you about it. I would like to thank Afrinic for accepting to give me a few minutes to talk about it, even though it was not in the initial agenda. The question is, how can we work together to improve security and resilience of the global routing system? So there is some initiative, and the whole idea is for all of us, for the technical community, to contribute to making the routing system more resilient. Next, please. Okay, a group of people developed what it's called the mutually agreed norms for routing security, or manners, which is available on the link that you can see here, that defines a minimum package of things that network operators can do to make the routing system more resilient. It emphasizes on what we can do and network operators can do together to make the system more resilient. So in detail, what do you have in the document, as you can see it maybe later, principles of addressing issues of routing resilience, interdependence and reciprocity, commitment to best practices, encouragement of customers and peers. The package indicates the most important actions that network operators can do, such as BGP filtering, anti-spoofing, and coordination and collaboration. This document is about the what and not about the how. So what you can do and not about how you can do, because there are other documents, such as the ones that are going to be presented today by Jan and Douglas, well, that have been presented in the past, but that they will continue to talk about for quite a long time. It is not replacing that. It is a commitment of higher level to do those things that will be indicated in the PCOPs and other documents. Good manners prevents propagation of incorrect routing information, prevents traffic with spoofed source IP address, facilitates global operational communication and coordination between the network operators. So it's a little bit an agreement between drivers to drive the right way. As you know, there are some countries where it is easier to drive and some where it's less easy, like mine, unfortunately. So we want the global internet to become easier, to have less problems, and everybody needs to cooperate to make it as such. Manners is not a document, it's not just a document, it is a commitment with a clear and tangible message. So everybody commits to do at least some things that are indicated in the document, and asks others, peers, clients, whatever, to commit to do this to make the internet better. So it's a commitment document. It's just the beginning. It has been launched on November 6th, so it's quite new. And it is going to evolve, but we hope that it's something that will help the network operators community to address the issues that it can address to make the internet more secure. At the public launch on November 6, these are the major operators that have committed to those principles. And what we would like to see is that there are more regional operators that also commit to that, and which is the reason why I am presenting it here. So these are some of the things that are expected, that, for example, you say I will follow the guidelines on filtering, anti-spoofing, coordination, etc. And then these are, well, you can commit to one or more of these when you say that you are committing to this document. The next steps is to expand the group of participants, as I have said, well, it started with those 3 or 4 things, but the objective is to expand it to other things that are, other actions that are considered as important for the security and resilience of the internet, and develop better guidance, in collaboration with existing efforts such as the BCOPs. If you want to have more information, you can contact me. I'm David Bekele, by the way. My email address is bekele@isoc.org. The who is leading this, my colleague Andrei Robachevsky, can be accessed through robachevsky@isoc.org. Thank you. Unfortunately, I have another meeting and I will have to leave, but Jan is in the group, the same group as Andres, and he can answer to the questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David. So all the questions, David, all the questions will be taken by Jan. Okay, so we are now going to proceed with the technical presentation. So how are we going to do that? You do the presentation, we take question at the end, or after each presentation you take the questions?
After each probably.
Consensus reached. So after each presentation you will have your questions. So when you go to the mic, please state your name and your organization. So I'll leave the floor to Eddie Winstead and the ISC FROOT and BY update.
Okay, so I am Eddie Winstead. I am with ISC, Internet Systems Consortium. For those of you that don't know what it stands for, how many of you use bind? Okay, I see some good hand raising. Okay, and a trick question: how many of you use unbound? Okay, I have both of those installed on my laptop here, so we're in good company. So what do I do at ISC? These days, I do a lot of what we typically call, and don't tune your ears off when I say this, but it's called sales engineering, okay? What this means is roughly 80% of the world's name servers use bind. Yet we have, I believe at this count, 145 direct customers. So there's a funding model issue that we have and have had, okay? So we were founded in 1994, and we have been going about for 20 years now. As it stands right now, we are certainly nonprofit, but we are currently self-funding. We did some refocusing earlier this year, and between that and increasing our revenue of actual customers, we are now currently in what is arguably the best financial state that ISC has ever been in. So it's been a very interesting past 4 years at ISC. A sigh of relief, I should say. Okay, so we're in much better shape these days. We have, you can see there, 36 employees these days. Our headquarters is in Redwood City, California, but we have staff dispersed across the globe. I myself live in Raleigh, North Carolina. For all you security geeks that were here yesterday, I lived about 2 blocks from where they arrested Kevin Mitnick way back when. So I'm sure he was looking at my traffic. So PPP back in those days. We are the authors and maintainers of Bind, as I said, and as well ISC DHCP. We also have a new DHCP server that we're very excited about called Kia, and this stems from the work that we did in Bind 10. So Bind 10's DNS part got spun out to be Bundy DNS. Kia remained with ISC, and we continue to develop and are very excited about that. We also do some DNS training and certification. The training part, I think the continent of Africa has well under control with Mr. Elkins, and actually a lot of the trainings that Afrinic is doing. So, but if you're interested in certification, please do talk to me afterwards. And actually, there's a slide at the end if we do have time. The other thing that we do at ISC is we operate FRoot. So FRoot is one of the 13 root name servers. And we have a phrase called "we eat our own," in the US it's called "we eat our own dog food," okay? So whatever we put in the code, we use. And we use that on FRoot. We also do some secondary name services, Anycast DNS, for nonprofits. We do many of the CCTLDs. I think we have 20% of the UN CCTLDs use ISC's SNS for secondary services. TZ and ZA are 2 examples that use our services. We also then host some projects, FreeBSD, NTP, also Internet Archive. But this sort of circular thing is that in our operational experience, it drives what we put into the code. Now, you'll kind of see what's missing here is that is recursive services. So we are very operationally in tune with what is happening in the authoritative world. We are not as much so on the recursive side of things. So on that side of things, we rely on customers to provide us feedback for what is happening there. Anybody been receiving any queries for random host names that don't resolve? Yeah, okay. And cause problems? Yes. So if you're having those problems and you don't have a well-working solution, please do talk to me afterwards. We have some experimental code that we can share with you that will eventually make it into the open source. I'm not going to go through the financials. I just want to reiterate that ISC is finally, after many years of struggling with funding, financially stable. We have a stable model, and the basis for that model is subscriptions support. And I have some friends from telco industry that came in today, and I told them I was going to pick on them, and I am. So the basic message is, you know, open source software is free, but is not without cost. So if you're using open source software in critical infrastructure, we encourage you to talk to us and get appropriate levels of support. And if you're on the regulation side, please do ask your telcos and your ISPs, do they have professional support on their DNS services? And that is whether they're running Bind or not. All right, so the main topic, though, for my presentation today is FRoot in Africa. I want to, at this point, thank Nashal for some awesome training he gave, I believe it was Monday? Yeah, okay. On both Anycast DNS, well, Anycast services, period, and IXPs. I wish that room had been much more full because this is how things are going to progress, right? So if we look here, what we have is, again, FRoot is one of the 13 root name servers, but you'll see that there's more than 13 even on this particular screen. Okay, so this is done via a routing mechanism called Anycast. So we can provide multiple instances around the globe. So what I really want to, I really want to go to the next slide. There we go. So for FRoot in Africa today, we have them in these locations. And the first one was in Johannesburg, and I believe was in what year? 2002-ish, and was the first root server in Africa. So that's part of our proud history as ISC and our engagement here in Africa. We want to build on that, and we want to build on that with that last bullet there at the bottom, new sites, okay? Where we like to be, though, is at internet exchange points. That is where you get the most benefit from a root name server. And so whatever hurdles you have to go through to improve your IXP infrastructure, please do so, okay, so that we can grow with you. So we've mentioned several times this week the RIPE Atlas probes, and so I'm going to mention them again. It is an awesome tool. Thank you very much, RIPE people. Here we're taking a look at comparative DNS route round trip times. This is for DNS start of authority queries. And what you really want to see here is lots of green. Okay, so as we can see, we have some work to do. We have lots of green down here, and we have a bit of red going on around here. And we don't have a lot of probes in a lot of places either. So we need more RIPE Atlas probes. I think Alan is going to give a talk on that later. But we need more of those, and we need more IXPs so that we can put more root servers so that these reds are no longer there. Okay. Here in Mauritius, on the day that we probed, it just so happened that FRoot was the fastest responding. Yay for that day. It's not always like that. Okay. But this is something that you can use as a tool to sort of in your drive to teach people why we need more IXPs in Africa. So on the FRoot side of things, we do this for the public good. It is certainly no more than a break-even endeavor. And we allocate nodes and put nodes where there are sponsors. What I want to really stress, and the IXP training talked about this a lot, is that cost shouldn't be your factor in not doing this. Starting an IXP is actually fairly cheap, but having an FRoot node or any root server node is actually fairly cheap, okay? And so part of the reason I'm here today, too, is that we want to make this even cheaper, okay? So here's what is usually the breakdown of a root node cost. You have the cost of the hardware, and you have a annual management fee. That can be up to US $10,000. However, subsidies for those are available. And so please do check out the link at the bottom if you want to go down this path. Another reason that I'm here today is that ISC has found a sponsor for this part. Okay, so what I really want to say to you is this: if you have interest in a root node, and whether you have an IXP or not, please do contact us. Do not let cost be your factor in not contacting us. Okay, let's start the relationship and let's find the funding together to make the thing work. Okay. Traditionally, we have done FRoot servers in this fashion: redundant routers and switches, 2 DNS servers, and a management server. We do have a new F single that is currently under development, and many of you are familiar with other single root nodes. So we're doing one as well. The other thing that I mentioned earlier is we do CCTLD Anycast DNS and secondary services. So what we are going to try to do with the single node is partition something in such a way that you could have both a root server there and CCTLD name server, public benefit, on the same device. So it remains to be seen how we engineer that, but that is the goal. Okay? One of the slides in the Shaw's talk was you have an IXP and you have a root server there, and you can have CCTLD name servers. Those are the main benefits of having an IXP. So we're trying to take care of both of those parts in one piece of hardware. There's a little bit about that. I do want to point out that whichever node gets chosen for your site will be a discussion between you and ISC. We've had in other parts of the world, particularly the United States, a lot of people want this single node because, oh, it's cheaper. You know, well, if it's not, how we size these is based on sort of the amount of attack traffic that we can expect to handle at a certain location. So one location may not be appropriate for an F single. But again, contact us. Let's start talking about it. Let's talk about the funding model. Let's talk about what types of hardware would be appropriate. Here's just a slide based on that sort of schedule. I'm going to speed up a bit because we're running behind schedule. Yeah, so contact us. We'll talk about the funding, and we'll get it done. We've done these in the best case scenario. We've put one in a functioning node in 4 months. That's not the norm. There's a lot of regulations and things to get through. That's it on FROOT, and that's really the main point of my talk. I do want to touch on some of the things that we are doing in Bind and DHCP. So we did refocus our efforts on Bind 9, as I mentioned. Bind 9.10.1 has actually been released at this point. We have some DDoS mitigation tools that I mentioned that we've been experimenting with. We've been trying to do much more testing and QA of our code, automated test coverage, and there is a new DNSSEC document that is underway. We rehosted the DLV site, and my apologies to Mr. Elkins, who talked to me before my talk. There have been some, I think, some issues with the move to that, so we're working out the kinks. So, So with 9.10, RRL is now on by default. There is a map zone format, and actually I'm going to speak about some of these coming up. But you'll note here that we've had 22,825 copies of 9.10 alone downloaded since February 25th. So that's pretty cool. Thank you for using Bind. We still remain really proud of the effects that response rate limiting provided for the authoritative DNS ecosystem. Okay. This is a graph of when we turned on RRL on an FROOT node in Amsterdam. This is the attacker giving up, but I want to note, though, that they don't stay given up. They come back. They try new things. So you know this. In performance-wise, on the recursive side, we have DNS prefetching that allows the recursive server to go out and prefetch records before the TTL actually expires. We've done some EDNS 0 processing to reduce some problems with lossy connections. And then we have a map zone file format that, if you note here on this slide, I said, this code, we typically tell people, don't put this into major production until 9.10.3, usually the .3 of the minor version. Because of the map zone format, we have some really large folks that decided to put this in with 9.10.0. It made us all sweat a lot, but it has worked out okay. They've noticed really, really great performance improvements in terms of loading large authoritative zones with 9.10. Let's see. Yep, that's that. We do have native PKCS 11 and 9.10. What this means is that you do not have to have OpenSSL any longer for your DNSSEC deployment unless you want to use it. There was a little bit of an issue this year with OpenSSL. So native PKCS 11 allows you to bypass that. That said, the one provider that has sort of certified this to work with Bind is Thales, the InShield device. We suspect there are others, but they are the ones that have partnered with us to actually confirm that it works. These are some planned features we have coming up. And I think the main thing we want to get across is that Bind 9 is going to be in development for long to come. We do want to have a streamlined way of adding zones. So we all have our little, magic provisioning system, lots of scripts and those sorts of things. We want to provide a way with possibly meta zones or extending NS update that you can add a zone on a master server or on a secondary server without having to actually edit the config file. And then we want a DNSSEC key policy manager. The two areas for DNSSEC that we feel like still need to be automated are key management and updating your parent zone with DS when you do a key rollover. So we have that. Also with, we're going to do that with CDNS and CDNS key. There's an RFC, I forget the RFC number on that. And we're also going to implement DNS tap. We have already implemented DNSSEC negative trust anchor and these DDoS mitigations. However, these are only available at this point through special arrangement with us. Again, most of the time that's to direct customers, but this does not have to, you do not have to give us money to get these things. If you have, particularly these DDoS mitigations, if you have a need for these, particularly with those random domain things, please see us and we will give you the code. I've been given the sign that it's time for me to go, so I guess I'll stop at this point and we will have any questions. While you're coming to the mic, I'll just say we're still working on DHCP. 4.1 will be around for quite some time. And Kia, we are having, even though it's 0.9, we have some large providers that have decided that it's good enough to use in production, which has made us sweat a lot, but seems to be going okay just now. So with that, any questions? Yes.
And I have my own mic. So, Jan George, Internet Society. So, I saw one very, very interesting feature planned, and that's IPv6 PTR records on the fly.
Yes.
Can you go a bit into this and explain what are you planning to do and what will the mechanism, how will it work and look like?
We don't know yet. That is the honest answer.
Okay.
But it is, and it was mentioned earlier in the previous session, I mean, it's not currently, in V4, we all sort of put dummy entries into our zones, and we certainly don't do that for V6. So there's just a need to manage the V6 entries on the reverse side. How we're going to go about it, we don't know yet. So if you have recommendations, we'd be glad to hear them.
So with that, so some people is actually checking the PTRs if that is a valid mail server, and with the on-the-fly IPv6 PTRs, we are just making that function basically irrelevant. Right.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. That would be sort of the goal. Yes. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you to Afrinic for inviting me, and thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. If you have any questions to Eddie, just please meet him during coffee break so that you can discuss and do above. So next, I'll call Dr. Nicanor. He will present the experience with open data performance of mobile networks. Dr. Ni, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My objective is to interest you in open data and the kinds of things that you can do with it, especially those who are very interested in evidence-based kind of analysis. I've chosen the topic Network Performance Index because I used data that had been published about congestion and call drops in a network. I'll give some hints on the motivation and then take a look at the analysis on congestion and call drops, and then an attempt to see whether there's any relation between the two, and then we'll quickly try and conclude. The report that you see is an experience with Ghana's Open Data Initiative, where they had published some data in a portal, and I analyzed a particular selected set of data. I modeled and analyzed data that the regulator had published on these two topics for various mobile networks, and I was curious whether there was any relationship between congestion and call drops, and then also wanted to experiment with, okay, congestion. Can you come up with an index for the entire country based on the number of operators that exist, and so on. The history of open data in Ghana is in September around 2011, the government signed up on the Open Government Partnership, and so the National IT Agency, for which I'm the chairman, released its first data set, and you can see it at data.gov.gh in 2012. Currently, there are over 1,200 plus data sets released, and it included the regulator, that's the National Communication Authority data, which I used for this study. The source data was in spreadsheets format, and the data covered a number of operators who are listed there, and the data was in the form of a percentage of congestion and percentage of call drops. So I didn't go and collect the data. I trusted the regulator to have the right data. It's a small data set, but I was surprised how much you could learn from that data, which is really my motivation for this. At the same time, they had defined some limits for the operators, 1% for congestion and 3% for call drops. This is what the data looked like. In other words, if you go to data.gov.gh and you go to the Ministry of Communications section, you'll be able to see the NCA, and then you can pull down whatever data they have there. So there were these two spreadsheets there, and I was curious to see whether it made sense, so I began to play with it. Notice that they are also trying to be visual, meaning that the red things suggest that they've exceeded whatever the limits were. So there's some desire for visualization, which is what I exploited in essence, meaning help it become more visual. I was doing my work in the R environment, so I have a place where I can keep some scripts, and then I have a console in which I can try things. When they are working well for me, then I can move them into my script so I can repeat it and keep on going. And then also you can see plots, and the plots are good quality plots, and so you can use it for many different types of things. So this is roughly what my kind of work on this topic was. So the approach was, let's study congestion and call drops first separately, using the traditional techniques for single variable type of analysis. So basic statistics, take a look at time series and see what you can learn from it, play with some histograms and see what is also there, look at density plots and so on, and see whether you can visualize what is going on within these networks. At the same time, since I'm looking for a common index for the whole country, there is something known as principal component analysis, which you can use to combine these things. So I played with that as well. Of course, it requires that you must have sufficient correlation between the columns of the data sets, and so you pay attention to that. Then I used scatter plots and curve fitting and so on to see if I could discover correlation between those two variables. The disclaimer here is that there's no attempt really by this study to determine what is good network or bad network. The real focus is to see if I could extract visualization so that we can independently make our own conclusions. So I'm not trying to say that this operator is doing better than this, but I can reveal what is in the data for everybody's consumption. So let's take a look at the congestion data. If somebody said 1% or 3%, I don't know what they mean. Are they talking of the mean? Are they talking of the median? Are they talking about that 75% of the numbers are below that number? It's not clear. I don't know. But if you were to assume it's median, then you can see that 3 of them may pass. And if it is, mean, they all, seem to fail. If it's the 75% of the numbers below the 1, then only 1 person passes. I'm trying to reveal that even the regulator's own limit needs to be more precisely defined. Okay? If I use basic statistics, these questions drop out. So if I were to play with the series and turn the numbers into charts of this sort, you can see that their behavior is different and at different times. So some people were doing very well, in the first quarter. Others were doing poorly in the third quarter. So you can begin to see that from the data, even though it's a fairly limited data set, that there is behavior. There's a process behavior inside there. So you could see, for instance, you can ask yourself questions by counting number of times somebody exceeds 20, for example, 20% congestion, and that will give you a certain flavor of quality if that is your objective. You could see, for instance, that the one in purple seems to be generally at a lower, trace level than the rest of them. But this is the sort of thing you can extract from the data set, which is, to me, very valuable. You could also play with a histogram, and if you've made the bucket to be the same as the percentage that they say is the limit, then you can see anything above the first column is exceeding. So you can ask yourself which of them exceeded the most, and you can tell. And you can ask yourself which of them exceeded the least, and you can tell. Because the first column really is the 1%, 0 to 1%, which is what had been stated there as the bogey. So just from extracting the data in these sort of forms, you can begin to get a sense of what is going on within the operators' networks and how they themselves are performing. And this is just based on congestion, and I rely on the regulators' data, and I respect the data. I cannot question it, but this is what it reveals. The next is to try and see what happens if you were to smoothen it a little bit better by way of using density type of curves. So if you were to play with the congestion density, you begin to see that some of them are more closely spiked or skewed towards the 0 and 1 than the others. So it should be evident that the one at the bottom is a little bit more skewed than, for example, the third one going up from the bottom. So irrespective of who they are, by simply extracting this sort of data from the data set that we have, you begin to get a sense of how the network is performing. And this is the sort of visualization that I was keen to illustrate. At the same time, you could also now say, okay, what if we were to try and create a national index? How would this look? Normally, what you do is you extract something they call component loadings from it, and then you look for positive or all negative correlations. And once you have that, you'll be able to combine them back and get an index. So if you were to do that, and the index is going to be around 0, meaning around the mean, so to speak. So you could see that if you combine the whole nation in the third quarter, there were a lot more problems for the whole country than before. Now, that's not something that is obvious looking from at the table, but when you combine it this way, you can say that in the third quarter, we were really above the mean in terms of congestion. Now, in case you want to just question yourself, look at it. You see, in the third quarter, there were 2 of them or 3 of them who had problems, and that is what gets reflected in the chart here. Let's look at call drops. Now, they said 3%, and you can see that the 3% is vague, but it was easy to pass. So if I were to use basic statistics, mean, and so on, they all pass. So the question really is, the regulator needs to regulate. He needs to be a little bit more precise in exactly what he wants. Okay, so if he's using the mean, then one would say that the operators are doing very well. So that's the impression that you get from this particular data. You do the same thing, take a look at the series, and you can see that in the first quarter they were not doing so well, but thereafter things sort of settled down. I don't know what was going on in the first quarter, but this is what it reveals. So then I say, okay, if you say 3%, let me bin them in the histograms at 3%. So once again, you can see after the first column, those who were doing well, those who were not doing well. And so evidently, the one at the bottom seemed to have most of its things within the first histogram column, for example. In the same way, you can begin to say, okay, what does the density say? And you can see that some of them are more skewed towards the 0, 1 than others. And that's revealing. But generally, they were all doing pretty good, except that some did a little bit better than the others. And this you don't see from the spreadsheet tables, which are the normal published sets of data. So now the last thing that is of interest to me is asking, what's the relationship between the call drops and the congestion? Because ordinarily, one would think that as my network is getting more busy, then my call drops will increase. But as it turns out, that's not necessarily the case, and that there's a base level of failures that occurs. However, for 2 of them, you do see some clearer correlation, in that the third one from the top seems to really correlate. So for whatever it is, they are running some network in which the congestion and call drops have a good relationship. Now, you could not see this from the spreadsheet tables, but with this kind of visualization, you are able to extract it, and you can learn more by this sort of thing. Of course, the first one, the one at the bottom, also does show some level of correlation, but the 2 top ones clearly don't have any clear correlation, which for me is also revealing. So I'd like to conclude by pointing out that if one were to have larger volumes of data, our conclusion may be much more confident. We need more complete data. In this case, as I looked at it, one operator had too many things not filled, so I dropped him out of the analysis. And if it is more current, then it can also be used to improve the network as you're going. Meaning, this is old data, 2010 to 2012, but if it was today, we could analyze it and we could tell the operator, go improve yourself, and he will improve himself. So the regulator needs to define a little bit more precisely what the performance criteria is, so that he can actually regulate these operators based on those things, maybe associated with a penalty fee and so on. Now, from my point of view, open data has therefore been a successful platform for me, an independent scientist, asking nobody any permission. They did not even know I'm doing this. I just went to the site, grabbed the data, and I did it for my own fun. And yet I'm able to produce something that I think helps them understand their business, and that is another positive side of it, that we can contribute to the development of a country by publishing data and having people analyze it and therefore give it back to the community as a contribution. I believe this is it, and I thank you very much.